Hello everyone, welcome back, and today's video will be all about currying. This will not be a typical video where you will just go and get the code of how to write the currying and you forget after that. But this video particularly focuses on how should you think when you encounter such a problem for the first time. Okay, so now let's suppose you have been asked this question in an interview and this is the problem you are facing and you have never seen the currying thing. Okay, now let's think about what is asked and let's break it down somehow. Let's see. Now this is the first one. Okay, if it is something like the interviewer is trying to ask you to implement a function, because if we know, if this is the only one that was given to us, that means it is a function. Okay, the first thing is clear, this is a function. Okay, and it has 5 arguments, and in all the subsequent sum calls there are 5 arguments. Now the first clarifying question that you should ask is, can there be 6 arguments? Okay, you have asked that, and now the interview says no. If the arguments are greater than 5, then you should throw an error. Okay, fine. So let's note down the requirements real quick. Requirements: if the arguments are greater than 5, error. Okay, this is fine. Now when do we have to print this? Now the interviewer says, if the arguments are equal to 5, then you have to print the sum. Okay, if args is equal to 5, you return the sum. This is also fine. Now let's see. There are 5 brackets over here. There are 2 brackets, means 2 function calls. There are 5 function calls here. So let's break it down. Let's suppose this is the sum 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay. Now if only this was given, then that's fine. That is very simple for us. This is our routine sum function. But okay, now after this we are seeing that there are one more pair of brackets. What does that mean? That means, like, whatever the return value of this function, listen carefully, whatever the return value of this function is also a function. Then only you can add this parenthesis after that, right? Okay, this much is understood. So now let's assume this one, this return value of this also, means this function also, should be also a function. Okay, because there are set of parentheses after this also. Okay, but the return value of this last one is not a function, it's actually sum. Sum means sum of arguments. Okay, this is fine, but how should we code this? Now again there will be a mess in your head. Then let's break it down. Let's go step by step. Now our first focus will be only to implement this. Okay, let's forget about the rest. Let's only implement this thing. Okay, fine, let's try to do that. How do we do such kind of a thing? We write a simple function, we write sum. But wait a minute, here is only one argument, here there are 5 arguments, here there are 3. So you can see there are variable number of arguments that you are receiving. So how can we handle such kind of a scenario? So to handle such kind of a scenario, we use spread operator, that is args. Okay, this is fine, this much is fine, this is how our function should look like. Okay, now when do we have to throw the error? When the number of arguments are greater than 5. How will we know what are the number of arguments? Let's say we have num a which is equal to arcs dot length. Fine. And how do we calculate sum of the arguments? Let's assume we have a function get sum. This will give us the sum of the arguments. Okay, this is also fine. Now if the number of arguments are greater than 5, then we throw the error. We will write the entire code in detail, but let's just focus on the logic, on how are we building this and what is the thought process that goes behind this. Okay, this is also fine. Now if number of arguments is equal to 5, then what do? Then we return sum A. Okay, this much is clear. But as you can see above, the number of arguments here has not met 5, right? Here the argument has not met 5. Therefore, what we are returning? We are returning a function. So do we have that function with us? No. So okay, we will write one more function over here. Okay, this function, let's name this helper, and this function will also receive variable number of arguments. If you haven't understood why I have written it like why this will receive variable number of arguments, let's go back and see that here the function called receive 2, the second bracket here receive 4, here 3. So this also receive variable number of arguments. Okay, this is also clear. And when these two conditions are not met, that time we are returning helper function. Okay, this is fine. This is how the structure of our code will look like, and this is it. Now the next question that comes to mind is, how do we implement this guy? And this can also return a function. So is this really necessary that this helper function will also return one more helper function, and that helper function will also return one more helper function? Okay, let's see. Now let's try to write the implementation for this function. Okay, I'll write the implementation over here. Now what is this doing? This basically, this function should also add the arguments and also get the length, but this function should also remember what was the previous number of arguments and what was the previous number of sum that it has received. How will we get that? We will get that from here, because it forms a closure with this sum. It forms a closure. If you are not familiar with this closure concept, I will clear this closure in the next video, but for now I am assuming that you know. So these guys will be available in this helper function. So what is the first thing that we need to do? We have to add number of A plus equals to args dot length, and this arguments is not this arguments is this one, the helper functions argument, because we are writing the helper functions implementation here. Okay, now again we will calculate the sum. Sum A will be equal to get sum, and this will also receive args, and it will give us the sum. Okay, this much is fine. Now again we can write these two lines, right? We could just copy paste these two lines over here. Now let's assume these two lines goes after this. Now the thing is, if the arguments are greater than 5, we are throwing the error. If the arguments are equal to 5, then we are returning the sum. But now if these two conditions are not met, we have to return one more function. So do we really have to write one more function over here, like function helper to this also receive args and do the same thing here also? No, that's not necessary, because whatever the function we are writing here is actually the helper function that we have written already, right? So instead of repeating this, what we can do is we could directly return helper. Okay, this is fine, and this is our entire code actually. But now the question should come to your mind is, if we are not writing one more helper function inside this, then why we have written this helper function in the sum itself? We could have directly written sum, right? But why now? The answer is, if we have written this sum itself, we will not be having the access to this num a and sum a. In order to form the closure, we have written this helper function inside this nested helper function. Okay, this much is clear. Now we will go straight into the code and we will try to understand it even more, and it will be more clearer to you. And if you have not understood it yet, don't worry, I'll be writing the code and you will be completely understanding. Let's first implement this sum function. Okay, how will you do that? We have already went through it. We will first get the number of arguments. How will we get the length of the number of arguments? That will be length. Okay, this will give you the number of arguments that you have received as a function. Okay, now let's calculate the sum a. How will we do that? We will write one helper function that will get us this sum a and args. Okay, let's quickly write that function get sum. This will receive args and we just have to return the sum of these arguments. So how will we do that? We will use the reduce function. So in this reduce function, we'll first receive the accumulator, then the current. This accumulator will accumulate everything and this current will be the values of the array. So here we are not providing the initial value, so accumulator will be having array's 0th index value as its initial value. Okay, so this is fine. Now what we have to do is we have to check if number of arguments is equal to max. Here max is equal to 5, as we can see from above. If this is the case, we return what? Sum a. If number of arguments is greater than max, then what do we have to do? We have to throw the error. Throw error invalid args. Okay, this much is also fine. And what is the next thing? We have to write the function, the helper function that we have seen. Okay, let's just declare the empty declaration with args, and yeah, that's it. And here we have to return the helper function. Okay, now let's try to run this first test case and let's see whether we are doing it correctly or not. Yes, we are doing it correctly. The answer is 15. Okay, now let's uncomment this and try to see what this helper should return. As we have already seen, the first thing what we have to do is we have to add the number of arguments to the previous one we have. What are the previous number of arguments? That will be num a, which is equal to this one, and this will be args dot length. Okay, fine. And what is the sum of those? Sum a will be get sum, and here we are passing args. Okay, now what we have, now let's suppose this was our question. Okay, let's comment this thing. This was our question. We have received 2, 3, 5. We have previously 1, so number of arguments will be 1 and sum will also be equal to 1. Now what we have to do is, here we know the second implementation received 2, 3, 4, 5. Here we have received 2, 3, 4, 5. We have added them, and if number of arguments double is equal to the max one, what we can do is we could return sum a. Otherwise we have to check if number of arguments has exceeded the max, then we have to throw the error like invalid args, and same thing. Now what we have to do, we have to return the function if these two conditions are not met. That means the number of arguments is less than 5. Then we have to return one more function. So what do we return? We return this helper. because this helper is already forming the closure with this sum, so we don't have to write another nested function over here. We don't want another function. That is the only reason we have written this as a nested function. We would have written sum if we don't care about these things, but we do care. We want what was our previous output. This closure is very important when we want to remember what was given to it previously. Then that is the very good case that we can use closures. Okay, now let's uncomment everything and let's try to run this. Okay, everyone is producing 5. Now let's give 6 over here. Will this break? Ideally this should, and it's breaking with error invalid args. So our currying function is working properly. So I hope you all understand this one, and if you find this helpful and if it added value to your day-to-day life or about your understanding on currying, please subscribe to the channel. Please give it a like. It really means a lot. Thank you so much.